Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you sticking around. So it's good to have an audience to talk to. Just to give you a sense of what I'm just going to share today, I'm going to at least give a glimpse as to our perspective of where we think the future of education to opportunity is going, and that just sets up then a context of what we see as some of the imperatives that need to be addressed, if you will, in overall higher education, how that shapes how we think about innovation, how we think about the design of curriculum, how we think about the design of affordability and everything else related to education. And then just to share with you how WGU is going about changing that or contributing to that change. Just by way of preparation, I am going to leave time at the end of this to allow for any questions that you might have. So if there are things that spark questions for you, we'll be sure to leave time at the end so we can respond to those questions and share a perspective. I think most of those who know me at WGU realize that there's probably not a topic that I can't share a perspective on, especially our beloved Red Sox. Everyone knows that how much of a Red Sox fan I am, and because Boston was my home for 11 years. So it's great to be back here. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Regardless of what we think about and what the future is going to be, is that one thing that we do believe is going to persist is simply this: the promise of education. That's what this is really about. It's about reinvigorating the promise of higher education, especially for the underserved. That when you think about the promise, it is that it is the surest path to opportunity. That those who pursue it and attain it will be on a path to opportunity. That opportunity is a better life, not only for themselves, it's a better job, it's better engagement in their families, communities, and society as a whole. And this ultimately creates social mobility, not just for themselves, but in fact a generational impact. And by that what I mean is we know the statistics that the children of a graduate from college are 10 times more likely to also graduate from college. This is vitally important. However, you'll see that as we look at some of the statistics, this promise is actually even today not true for the majority of adults in the United States. So we are endeavoring to figure out how we make that increasingly a reality for not just the privileged, but in fact for everyone. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of where the past meets our future. And I'm not going to go through a whole history of higher education in the US, but if you were to consider what it looked like over the last century or even the last 2 centuries in the US, there's pretty good evidence that higher education has seldom led the transformation. It's often caught up to what is going on in the workforce or in the economy. Examples of that you can look at in terms of where apprenticeship became a huge part of the first Industrial Revolution. And then the second Industrial Revolution came about, and you really start to have the rapid proliferation of what I'd call the modern baccalaureate. Instead of just having degrees in teaching and law and theology, you started getting pretty mass adoption of degrees in accounting and management and in engineering fields, et cetera, where previously that was through a journeyman credential or some apprenticeship. So when we think about the third Industrial Revolution, you'll see pretty quickly that in the 100 years, the higher education model in the US hasn't really fundamentally changed. We, in fact, codified post-second Industrial Revolution some of the things that we're dealing with now, which are things like the credit hour, shared governance, tenure, things like these. These things actually got codified like in 1925, 1940, they got reaffirmed, et cetera. So we're going to just take a quick glimpse at what do we think are some of the things that are changing the future of education, or at least the influences that are going to change how we think about education. You all know this. This is not new data or information about it, but we do know the impact of machine learning, AI, data, you name it. If there's one way to define the fourth Industrial Revolution that we're on the cusp of, it is the intelligence age. It is about all that data and information and how it's going to inform differently, how we do things differently. Now, the impact of that automation is disproportionately to skills that you'll see on this next slide that are physical in nature. So when you look at employment growth, even just in this last period, 1980 to 2015, all occupations grew by 50%, but that was not equal. It was disproportionate to those that are highly on the social skills and analytical skill dimension, where you only saw in the same time period 18% growth in those that were physical skills. The impact of that is that, the prior slide highlighted just the impact of AI and what we see actually coming about, which is it impacts certain economies more quickly than others. And when you think about the US economy and the jobs are going to be impacted by that, this also is disproportionate to the lower income populations. This is disproportionate to those who don't hold any post-secondary credential. You can also see the changes in the dynamics of how we think about employment or about work in general. Over average job tenure in the last 5 years alone has dropped by 10%, and 40% of all workers expect to change job in a given year. That's literally like nearly half of all of you are going to have a new job within 12 months. The other last thing just to highlight here is on the right side of this, just gives you a chart, an estimate of the number of individuals who hold college degrees today. Are they actually employed in jobs that require a college degree? And interestingly enough, the first time or the recent college graduates are taking jobs for which they did not need the post-secondary credentials that they just acquired. And there's a persistent underemployment at about 30%. So it makes you wonder, is like that supposed coin of the realm, is it the right coin of the realm? I mean, is that degree, the bachelor's degree, is that really the right thing as we consider the future of work and its impact on higher education? Lastly, this is just simply to highlight the fact that when individuals consider where they're going to achieve the skills and competencies they need for the future of work, what are they looking to? There's a great study that just came out recently with Strata Gallup, and they highlighted that, in fact, all of us, when we think about the new skills or the upskilling that we have to go through for the future of work, the majority of us do not think about a university. We actually think we're going to get this from an employer or some other provider of it. But what isn't changing is when you think from a consumer standpoint as to why we want education in the first place, look at the top number, the number one reason. It's still the same today. We want guaranteed employment. We want the promise of education to work, that if I attain this learning, that it's going to be a great path to opportunity. Other factors in here are also evident, which is we're dealing with individuals that require much greater flexibility in how they access and attain that learning. Cost and affordability still matters a lot. But it is changing the dynamic of how we think about consuming education. It is not a one-and-done model anymore. So last two things on this of trying to building the case for innovation around higher education. These are just some additional statistics that I think we're all pretty aware of. First and foremost, that there are 35 to 40 million, call it split the difference, 37 million adults in the US who have some college but no credential. You see the statistics I shared there before that according to the US Census Bureau, for all the advances we've had in higher education, still today only 1/3 of adults in the working age population hold a post-secondary or hold a bachelor's degree. If you add in sub-degree credentials to that, the number only goes to 42%. Only 42% of our working age population actually holds some form of a post-secondary credential. And yet, 2/3 of jobs are going to require it. And there's 5 million already today that have a gap between the jobs needed and those that actually requiring a degree or some post-secondary credential. Where are we with our current outcomes? 58% today of those who actually start. But let's just do the math on this. High schoolers, if you just even consider traditional age population, high schoolers, only 70% of high school completers actually matriculate to any post-secondary program. So if only 58% of 70% that matriculate complete, we're still roughly 42%. We aren't moving the numbers in terms of those who are actually acquiring credentials. Worse, those who acquire the credential, the next stat there, only 29% of those actually are deemed ready for success. This is actually a survey of employers' readiness of college graduates to be successful in their job. So what do employers do? They invest gobs of money then training us to do the jobs that we just got a credential to do. It's not working so well, right? You can see the other factors there. Only 71% of them are actually even achieving full-time employment after the completion. Only 37% engage in work. Only 40% even say it was worth it. Why? Because this is where we are today. the traditional model in terms of the promise of education, including even the economic assessment of it, the return on that education is getting harder and harder to sustain. Today, the average cost of a 4-year a bachelor's degree is approaching $80,000. Only 21% of those who actually look to pursue it believe it's even affordable. So you can understand why candidates are saying we should make it free. But that's not the problem. Even if you make a bad product free, it doesn't actually fix the problem, right? It's like, great, so we made something free that on it only 29% of those who actually acquired something were ready for success in the job that they were looking to get in the first place. You can also see the 60%, that's the graduation rate, or the 58 to 60% there. Here's the other thing, $29,000, nearly $30,000 of debt per undergraduate. This is just to get your bachelor's degree. This is the coin in the realm. You're going to go get the $30,000 debt, $80,000 in total cost, to get a job that's only going to increase your income per year within 4 years of graduation by a little over $12,000 a year. How's the ROI on that supposed to work? Meanwhile, on the right side of this, you can see that pretty much more than any other industry, the cost of the higher ed sector has been rising so much faster than virtually everything else that we as consumers actually consider. And there's lots of contributing factors to that. I'm not going to get into that. It's just simply to highlight that the ROI itself is also not working for our traditional forms. So where does that bring us? This is what we're trying to solve for. Today's learner is not only seeking the first opportunity, they are also seeking the next opportunity. And when you consider the first and next opportunity, you have to also consider the context of your consumer. 64% of the individual students enrolled in higher ed today, which is 20 million people, 64% are working. 40% are older than 25. 25% are parents. Half of them are independent financially from the parent. This is so counter to every one of our simple notion of what college is and all the movies that have been made about college. That somehow it's this beautiful emerging adult experience. You leave the house, the parents are so proud, you go live on a campus, you're totally safe, you're in a nice bubble where all the mistakes you make don't have that big of consequences. That worked really well for the privileged. One last statistic I'll give you on this as to why I feel like today's higher ed system and what we have is effectively a degree mill for a privileged is for this very reason. In the last 50 years, the attainment rate of those from top income quartile households has gone from roughly 40% to now 70%. Whereas the attainment rate from individuals from the bottom quartile of income households has gone from 9% to 11%. Our system works really well for you if you are from a upper income quartile household, if you had parents who went to college. You will go to college, you will complete college, you will get a job, you will be on your merry way. But if you are not from that, it is fundamentally not working for you. So let's talk about now some higher ed's imperatives. This is the first and foremost. I loved listening to the futurists this morning. I love knowing that the punch of a button, I could sue any one of you. If any of you saw that, it was amusing. It was, you gotta love the Daily Show. They always take an interesting angle on things. But the reality is that our entire world and everything that we now expect in it has been affected by digital and mobile technology. That same is true for students. The students are actually consumers. They're being influenced by everything that we expect. Everything from the on-demand nature of Uber and Lyft to the booking of travel through my mobile device, like banking online entirely. Heck, most of us actually bank with places like Robinhood and others. Like, I never go to a branch. Everything about our lives is changing, and yet for some reason we think education shouldn't. How many of you would say that in all other aspects of your life, pick banking, pick travel, pick shopping, everything else, that you would say that the mobile or online version of it is worse than the in-person version of it? And yet, for some reason in education, we go, oh, online, it must not be as good a quality. Really? You want to call your travel agent and book your flight? You know exactly what I mean. This is changing our students' expectation of how they expect to learn. We anticipate that this will affect everything like teaching models, the student experience expectations, everything from a regional-based accreditation. You think of just the virtual delivery, which is the slide right after this, it fundamentally changes the geographic notion of a service area. When you now realize that the biggest barrier to accessing learning is whether you have broadband access, not whether you have a campus within 30 minutes of your drive, right? Virtual delivery will fundamentally shape the future of higher education. It democratizes in a way that nothing else could. You have rapid scaling of access. You can reach and teach individuals where they are. It is a foundation for mass customization. What do we mean by mass customization? That every individual can learn and access learning the way that it works for them. That now I have a means by which I can work the learning into my already busy and complex life. We talked about lifelong learning loop. I appreciated this morning, Parmenter actually brought this up. We all want to be lifelong learners, but then you have to get your credential. That is absolutely true. We are learners, but the challenge with learning is that you actually have to have a credential. You need something that signals to everyone that you possess the skills and competencies for the opportunity that you're pursuing. And it's not sufficient to just simply say, oh, I've read all these books, I've done all these things, et cetera. Why? Because the individual who's wanting to purchase you as a skilled and talented individual, they need to have some validation or assessment that you actually do possess those skills and competencies. For all its imperfections, a bachelor's degree was an incredibly good signal. It's an incredibly great signal. Why? If anything, it gives the individual who holds it optionality, because it signals to everyone that I can do hard things, that I accomplished and completed the learning necessary, that I acquired skills and competencies that were going to be relevant to what I was going to do. That is the idea of a learning credential, in my opinion. That this is actually about degrees. It actually presents the optionality that has a lifetime of worth. Its shelf life is a lifetime. However, because of the nature of work, where things are changing so rapidly, we actually fully anticipate that there will be the emergence of competency or skills-based credentials. You'll notice that the shelf life of these things is much shorter. It's 2 to 7 years. The skills and competencies associated with acquiring a micro-credential, if you will, only has relevancy to something that may only exist for 2 to 7 years. Any of you who are engineers or in this technology world like I was before WGU, languages change about that quickly in coding. Why? Because the platform and the data models and the user experience, they change that rapidly too, such that prior coding languages are no longer sufficient to solve the problems for the future. So your skills change. Most of us can think about on-premise software that doesn't exist anymore because everything's cloud. Well, man, what's cloud architecture versus on-premise architecture? And the skills and competencies needed for cloud architecture are surely going to be replaced by something soon. These both will exist in our lives going forward. The key is how do they actually stack and create a foundation for lifelong learning and advancement. The other key factor is that we will get more and more personalized learning. If you think almost all of us who went to a traditional institution like I did, that there was a standard model, and if you were good at that standard model, you got an A. If you were average at that standard model, you got a B. If you were less than average, you got a C, but you still graduated, right? But it's a standard model. In the future, it's going to flip. Why is it going to flip? Because all the data and information that we can actually utilize to personalize your learning journey for you. Because one thing we're certain of is that we all bring different knowledge to the learning. We all learn in different ways. We all learn in different paces. We progress in different models. The expectation in the future is that the institution of learning will adapt everything they do to me to dramatically increase the probability that every individual is successful. Versus the, man, these are really, really good students, so why don't we admit only the really, really good students, so then we'll have a 90% completion rate. Isn't that the model of traditional models? Nope, admissions criteria. Why do we have admissions criteria? Because we only have so much capacity to begin with. And if we only have so much capacity, which students do we want to admit? Only those who have already proven that they know how to learn regardless of what we do. Versus if the challenge is like, oh no, we have to personalize the learning journey so that every individual succeeds, that totally changes the nature of things. If you combine this, by the way, with virtual delivery, you eliminate all the capacity problems too. Well, I wouldn't say all of them. You definitely have to still address instruction and faculty engagement and everything else like that, but you dramatically free up capacity because you don't have to fit people into a classroom. Just the same way you don't have to build malls today, right? I can buy selection from all over the world, never having to have to go to a store. So the personalized learning journey is really starts with the fundamental premise that every single individual has the innate capacity for learning, but they learn in different ways, in different modes, everything else like that, that you now need to personalize that approach. Then they begin that journey, and what do? You learn a ton about what they actually do. And the model is that it adapts constantly to, in fact, improve the quality of that learning experience for that one individual. We live by a simple premise at WGU that one by one, we solve for the individual and advance outcomes one student at a time. You cannot hide behind aggregate measures. You have to solve one student at a time. Lastly, what was old is now new again. Advancing experiential-based or work-based learning. The apprenticeships used to be the coin of the realm in the 19th century. You had to get the journeyman credential. Very few went to a post-secondary institution, unless you went, again, into theology or to teaching or maybe law. But even law was a very short program, and then you went into practice. You started as an apprentice. Well, guess what? If you want to start solving the gap between what an individual with a degree has and what's actually needed in the work, why not just stop drawing that line and start blending it? We anticipate that we'll see more and more of this. It's like, how do you bring applied learning into all designs of programs? Any of you go through a licensure program in the room? Nurses, engineers, medical fields, teachers, you name it. All of them have practicum. You actually have to see how well they're applying what they're learning into the actual experience. We think that's going to be true in coding and in technology. We think that's going to be true in management. We think that's definitely emerging and true in engineering and so many other places. What's also interesting is this provides an opportunity for alternative providers of post-secondary education to emerge. That now you can do paid internships that also has integrated learning. Learning in the sense of it's instructor-led versus the work. But this also needs to be incorporated into the overall learning record of that individual as well, which is this piece. Now how do you create an environment that instead of having a transcript, by the way, that somehow the institution that we all went to became the bank and only the bank could hold on to our transcript, and even we individually have to write that bank to say, hey, can you send my transcript to somebody else to prove that, in fact, I went to your institution, completed these courses, got this degree, et cetera. The world that we live in now is that I own that. It is my wallet. And through technology like blockchain and others, what can we do? With all the assessed and validated learning that happens regardless of the area in which I learned it, whether I went to a university, whether I did it through an apprenticeship, whether I went to a coding boot camp, whether I've had it validated and certified by a CompTIA or a NICE certification or things like that, regardless of where I acquired it, it's been validated and assessed such that it can be in my mobile wallet or my mobile credential wallet. That now it's a signal to virtually everyone that these are the competencies and skills and credentials that I hold. That's what's going to happen. Now, the other value of this is that it creates incredible insights for the individual learner. Because when you see also hiring and recruiting practices change and become more skills-based, an individual who's acquiring those competencies can have almost real-time visibility as to, as you expand these competencies, having completed this course, these are the opportunities that become available to you. Burning Glass, one of the partners that we have here that does a lot of research on this, specifically in liberal arts degrees, they've shown if you expand by 2 to 4 courses and acquire certain specific skill sets, you can increase the number of jobs that you can pursue by like 1/3, and it will increase your compensation by like 20 grand. Wow, what a way to rethink liberal education, a liberal arts degree. That you can now have immediate insight into the value of the competency you're acquiring in your learning because now it maps directly to the work and the opportunities you're going to pursue. Which leads me to my last point about the imperatives that we have. we have to recast the measures of quality in higher education. There's pretty much higher ed and diamonds whose quality measures are based on scarcity. Right? That's the idea. It's like it's based on how many students do you have, what kind of placement rates they have, what's their GMAT or ACT or SAT scores, what research do you do, and everything else. That tells us a lot about the types of students you may attract, but it doesn't tell us a lot about how good was the learning that was actually acquired. Why are we not thinking about the quality measures that have to do with outcomes? How do we increasingly focus on attainment and completion rates? And a measure of access is actually completion and job gains rather than enrollment. This also allows you to think more like Amazon, quite frankly. And the way I've articulated it is this way. There was no think in Amazon that we were worried that with every customer that we added, somehow the quality was going to go down. But in higher ed, it's like, man, if we admit one more and they don't meet our bar, does that threaten our completion rates, our grad, research, et cetera? Like, actually, you can improve quality while you improve scale. Even still, here's another example I like to point out, and I used this earlier, which is we have 120,000 full-time students enrolled at WGU. When you have 3% of those having a bad experience, that's an audience that's 3 times the number of people in this room right now. How would you like to walk into a room with that many people who are really mad about your experience? That's not a very friendly environment. But when it's 3% of a small number, it's 30. That's not too bad. Scale starts to allow you to tackle problems that are individual in nature. And you can, again, solve the personalized learning, improve outcomes, everything else. We have to think about recasting the measures of quality in higher education. Does it reinforce completion? Does it reinforce attainment? Does it reinforce return on investment? Does it reinforce engagement at work? Does the promise of higher education actually work? And how do we put the measures around that? So let me just kind of transition now and end with this WGU. How many of you just in the room have heard of WGU? It's pretty good, about half of you. So I suspect that while you've heard of us, you may not know everything about us. And so I want to just take the opportunity to share with you a little bit about WGU and the things that I believe make it different. And it's captured there in the phrase. It truly is everything. It is all about the student. Just by way of history, really quickly, it literally is named Western Governors because 19 governors of Western states formed an institution. Just consider for a moment, all these governors had public institutions in their respective states. They didn't put the money that they seed funded WGU into all those institutions. Just consider the reasoning and rationale behind why governors decided to establish a new private nonprofit institution. They may have been trying to solve a problem that other institutions weren't solving. So today, like I mentioned, we have 120,000 plus full-time students. We have over 170,000 alumni, graduates in all 50 states. We actually have more students in the East than the West. That Western always comes up anytime we're engaging with states in the East, by the way. It's not my fault the governors didn't hire a branding agency and name it something that may have been more broadly relevant. But there are a couple of key things. Down there at the bottom, it was fundamentally established to increase access and improve quality in higher education, especially for underserved individuals. They started with one of the numbers that we highlighted earlier, those that had some college but no degree. And there are 2 key aspects of it in that bullet point there: competency-based, online. And Governor Mike Leavitt was more, hey, this internet's going to be big. Governor Romer out of Colorado was like, I'm a pilot. I don't care much about where the pilot learned how to fly a plane. I just want to know whether they're competent to fly the plane. So that really started establishing the dynamic of what created WGU. The other key thing is that we are a different model of tuition. It is a single flat rate of tuition for a 6-month term. Being a competency-based, you can complete as many courses as you're able in that 6-month term. And we'll talk about the impact of that in a second. This is the profile of students that attend WGU. Our average age is 36. Over 70% are in one or more categories of underserved populations. You can see that on the left. Active duty members, 73% are working full-time. 63%, or actually that number needs to be updated, about 62, 63% of our students today are receiving financial aid. You can get a sense is that our profile of students is more representative of the whole of enrollment in higher education generally. But when I say we actually focus entirely on the students, what we're focused on is how do you rethink everything about the delivery of education, the funding and affordability of it, the instructional model, the curriculum development, everything else. How do you center everything on the student? That led us to things like this. It's actually the competency that matters, not the seat time. Seat time is a variable. It's actually learning and demonstrating proficiency in the learning objectives. It's also making sure that that becomes now personalizable to the pace and method and existing knowledge that an individual has. This all-you-can-learn term, it actually results that in among our bachelor's graduates, their median time to complete is 2 years and 4 months, versus the median time today in a traditional model is over 5 years. We also don't develop our own content. 95+% of all the learning resources are licensed from all of our partners out there. There's really good stuff that other institutions develop, that OpenStax develops, that Pearson develops, et cetera. We focus on teaching, whereas we can actually leverage all the content that's available out there. Here's another unique element. We rethought the instructional model when you're delivering online. And there's many reasons why, because one of the key things we notice is that factors for why students don't persist or complete had little to do with cognitive ability and had a lot to do with life. And so we rethought everything that a faculty member could do to increase persistence, and we ultimately disaggregated the role into 4 unique roles. We manage a master curriculum, so regardless of where you enroll in WGU, you're all going through the same courses in the program. So we have a curriculum team that designs all the curriculum and the assessments related to those competency-based programs. And then we have 3 different student-facing teaching roles. Our faculty program mentors are fundamental to the successes that we're achieving, because this is now like having a one-to-one relationship from the day you start until the day you complete. They provide all that integrated instruction, all the planning, all the preparation work that you need to go through for your assessments. They also deal with the things that are life challenges. Example, Hurricane Irma and Harvey that came through 2 years ago. We had over 11,000 students impacted by those hurricanes. The first person they call is their faculty mentor. They don't call Student Support and Services Center. They call that faculty mentor. The first time they meet in person, by the way, is often when they graduate. Almost all the conversations happen before that over video conferencing. Then you're also, during your course, you're going to interact with all the course instructors. But if you already know a course and it only takes you 2 weeks to complete, you may not interact with that course instructor a lot. But the areas that you don't know and it takes you 4 months to complete, you may be talking to that course instructor a lot. So it allows you to focus on the areas that you need to learn versus accelerating through the areas where you already have knowledge. There's flexibility in that course instruction, but those course instructors are subject matter experts, meaning PhDs, in that particular course of instruction. Whereas our program mentors are master's degree or higher with, on average, 8.5 years of industry experience. And then we separately have evaluators who evaluate all the assessments of the students. They are giving objective assessments of whether an individual student is demonstrating the proficiency against the competencies that the curriculum team defined. We also reimagined credentialing. We started unbundling the degree. Why? Because we're a competency-based model. And when you can unbundle at a competency level, you can also recombine those competencies into non-degree or micro-credentials. We also design all of our competencies to be directly aligned with the needs of the workforce. Example of this, you may have seen our announcement in our partnership with edX, where we have our IT framework micro-bachelors. We also have medical coder, and we're about to launch our medical assistant credentials that are fully stackable into nursing programs, bachelor's in health informatics, et cetera. In teacher education, we have many postgraduate certifications and endorsements. It allows us to combine and unstack and restack the competencies into the credentials that are relevant for the workforce. That's very different than a traditional bachelor's-only model. The student experience, just like virtually all those other times, when you think of banking, when you think of travel, when you think of everything else, we've enabled the entire student journey utilizing technology. When the data that comes out of that allows you to provide a personalized experience, it also allows you to make better decisions to drive individual outcomes. Then we built, let me come back to that, then we built a data practice around that. What do I mean? We manage our student operations the same way you'd manage a business. Everything is focused on how individual students are progressing and at what pace and are they achieving. We focus on improving the probability that every individual succeed, and we meet on a regular basis to observe all those data at a program level, at a course level, program level, college level, everything and anything that's going to impact a student journey. We obsess about improving that constantly. Whether we have to redesign curriculum, whether we have to think about a different practice and model, whether we actually have to develop new policies, whether we have to have greater individual instruction and engagement with the students, like, we drive a practice that increases the transparency about those things that ultimately result in outcomes for the student. If I went back to this, by the way, just really quickly, I wanted to highlight something that not only do we have a low flat rate tuition per 6-month term, and by low, what I mean is roughly $3,500, which includes all the learning resources. $3,500 for a 6-month term. If our graduates are completing in 2.5 years, that's a rough cost of $17,500 or so, versus the $80,000 number you saw for a typical program. But that wasn't enough for us. We also focused heavily on reducing the borrowing that our students had by introducing a program that we called Responsible Borrowing Initiative. It was simply to better inform students about the cost of attending WGU, so you did not borrow more than you needed. And you can see just in the 5 years, from 2013 to now, we've been able to reduce borrowing by $6,000 per graduate at our institution where we already have a really low cost. We see this continue to drive it down to where we think we can get closer to $12,000 per graduate. Again, 62% of our students are taking financial aid of some sort today. Lastly, we do obsess about these outcomes: pace and persistence, completion and satisfaction, and relevancy and credibility with the workforce. That delivers a better student experience. If you look at all the WGU measures versus traditional higher education, whether it's job-related knowledge, challenging work, faculty interactions, WGU model works really well. When you consider WGU graduates and their success, employed full-time overall, 16 percentage points higher. In field of study, the same as the industry as a whole, but you can see over $20,000 within 4 years of graduation for WGU graduates versus sector averages closer to $12,000. And employers are really, really satisfied. 97% overall satisfaction. 91% of our employers say that our graduates meet or exceed their expectations. And 94% would hire again. Right now, we actually see about 98% of our employers are hiring our graduates again. Lastly, I'll just leave this with you, and if we have time for any questions, is simply this, is that when we centered on students, we focused on improving quality, expanding access, and optimizing outcomes. Our model started with, like, how do you design the curriculum so that it's more relevant to the opportunities and jobs that they want to pursue? This being the #1 reason why students want to come and get their degrees in the first place. We also focus on personalizing learning and competency-based education model that allowed for more flexibility. We provided very individualized support and instruction. When you combine that with then delivering entirely online, it allows for greater flexibility where every student can learn independent of time and place. That also allows us to then deliver at a much lower cost. So when you combine that low cost, a reduced time to a degree, and responsible borrowing, you're dramatically reducing the total investment individuals have to make to acquire their post-secondary credential, and then driving outcomes like we have on the right. We think there is a better way. We're not done. We obsess about students because we already recognize all the influences that are changing how they think about acquiring learning, how that learning provides a pathway to opportunity, how it happens the first time and the next time. We know that there's individual students and populations of students that we aren't very effective with yet. Are we better than comparatives? Sure. But are we better than we were before? Not yet. Not fully. And so we're excited about where these things are going to take us in the future because we think it really, truly reinvigorates the promise of higher education, not just for the privileged, but for everyone. Thank you very much. Mark, I'm looking at you. I don't know if we want, I know we're at end, but I don't know if we want to take any questions or not.
So why don't you take one question?
Okay.
Who's got the best question?
High bar. There's a hand over here.
I don't know if this is going to be the best question, but hopefully it's good. So my question is around soft skills. So I saw on that slide that it was something like 93% of employers were satisfied with the soft skills of WGU graduates. So I was wondering, I guess, two parts. Do you think that number is so high because of the life experiences that the average graduate brings to their education? Or is it part of the educational experience? And I guess, two, what do you think is the value of a higher education institution in developing those soft skills?
Yeah, I'll take the second part of that question first, which is there's pretty good evidence that liberal education is so vital to the lifelong learning potential. I mean, if anything, it signals to employers that you have the capacity for learning. So if the job is always going to be changing, you want the individuals who've demonstrated the capacity for learning. That is very much captured in what we like to call enduring or power skills, not soft skills, because they are truly those things that differentiate us from machines, if you will. So that is vital to the instruction that we design, and the curriculum that we design. What we believe in, though, is applied liberal education, meaning that not everyone should just take college algebra because it's a general ed requirement. It's like, you should actually take the analytical learning that's relevant to the degree field or the program field that you're pursuing. You know, statistics would be way more valuable in management than calculus in tech, if you will. Like, you have to think about what is the analytical skill set that you need for the field that you're pursuing and apply that thinking to how you design the liberal education. That is same is true for communication ability, writing ability, reasoning capability, dealing with ambiguity, interpersonal dynamics. Like, those things are critical, so we design that into our curriculum. Whether or not the assessment of the employers of our graduates is a function of maybe having more work experience versus their experience at WGU, we don't know. I don't have the data to know. My own sense is that we're sustaining those high rates while a growing percentage of our students have not had any prior college nor work experience. Meaning the fastest growing age demographic of our students is the under 24 population. It's now 11% of our total. So, and the fastest growing. And these individuals haven't had the same work experience, and we're still able to achieve those outcomes. So I think both contribute for sure. So thank you so much. Everyone have a great evening.